Mornin. I am James Quinlan Meservy, fantasy author extraordinaire, creator of creatures, embellisher of events, and Firebrand, stories that kindle the imagination. And I am here with myself on JQM Literary Chat. I kind of decided that I would record myself doing this because I am incredibly uncomfortable recording myself and thought it might be a good experience to do so. So, first of all, is the first question I ask individuals when they do the literary chat is tell us about yourself. So, I don't know what you know or don't know about myself, but I'll try and tell you. I am from northern Utah originally, grew up northern Utah, spent. Spent a couple years of my childhood in Hinesville, Georgia, where I ended up originally learning to speak. So yes, the southern language is the the southern dialect of English is my native tongue. And yes, if I talk with anyone southern, then before too long my original accent comes back in full wave, and you'll never know that I left the state of Georgia. Funny story on that point. I was doing some archaeology work a few years back, and we went down to New Orleans. And while we were down visiting New Orleans on a day off, I was wandering around the French Quarter and chatting with some people. And someone asked me where I was from, and I said I was from Utah. And that particular individual said, "Yeah, I've been to Utah. Good little town." And I'm like, "Town? I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah." And they're like, "No, you're not. You're you're from Georgia." No, actually, I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. Of course, I was saying this in my southern drawl, which for whatever reason is very difficult for me to replicate when I'm not down south. So that's kind of funny. But I actually, in that particular case, I had actually had to pull out my driver's license and show them that it was a Utah driver's license before they'd believe that I was from northern Utah. Anyway, other things about myself. I greatly enjoy to write. I greatly enjoy to read, and have a good time communicating and talking with other authors. In fact, my favorite part about being an author is creating lasting communications with others and getting in contact with and making those connections of authors, and I think that is fantastic. So, what influenced me to write genre? My current genre? Well, my current genre is fantasy. I am presently writing as I'm recording this. I am in the middle of writing and preparing Shades of Mortality of the Realm of the Light series, book 3 or book 4, excuse me, for publication, and just barely finished the creation of the Realm of the Light book 3, which is Perfectly Evil. And well, what influenced me to write fantasy was that I have to go back to when I was in 5th grade. If you guys remember from some various things that I've said, when I was in the 5th grade, I did a homework assignment that was create a short story that was Halloween themed, and I created the story of Darkfang, which in essence was the outline for Year the First of the United, the Realm of the Light, Book 1. And then the story just continued to stick with me, and as the story continued to stick with me and I got thinking about turning it into a novel, I looked into different genres that I can make it, and I decided, you know what, the original story was about a talking wolf that had magical powers and magical abilities and stole the souls of humans, and I'm going to keep it that way, so I guess I'm fantasy. So my series is fantasy by default. And then it kind of turned out that I loved writing fantasy so much that anything else I try ends up having a hint of fantasy and a hint of magic, even when it shouldn't. Who are my favorite authors? Well, my second favorite author, let's start with him. My second favorite author is an individual whose writing has meant a great deal to me, and that is Mark Twain. I have always, ever since I was a kid, and have been and was exposed to the story of Tom Sawyer and then the subsequent story of Huckleberry Finn. He's been a great inspiration and a great fan. And then when I started reading more as an older individual, I read Tom Sawyer and then absolutely loved it. And then I read The Adventures of Huck Finn and absolutely loved it. And have since read A Young Connecticut Yankee. No, I don't think that was right. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court and absolutely loved it. I'm presently in the middle of reading his autobiographical sketches and have think it's fantastic. Now, my absolute favorite author, as most of you probably already know, is Charles Dickens, and I have been Charles. When I was in high school, I became I was in a reading class about English literature. We read some Shakespeare. We read some Chaucer, Dickens, and I remember we covered a couple of and analyzed a couple of Emily Dickinson's poetry, some of her poetry, and some other British authors, and something about when we read Charles Dickens, just something about the story of the story of Christmas Carol and then the subsequent stories from him just kind of stuck with me, kind of resonated with me, and I absolutely loved his storytelling ability, and he's been my favorite author ever since. In fact, I've often joked with a handful of friends that Shakespeare may be known as the legendary wordsmith of England, but the greatest writer that ever came out of there was Charles Dickens. What are my favorite books? Well, I right now, and for the longest time, have 5 that sit at the top. The first one of those that I'll talk about is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I absolutely loved Frankenstein. I first read it in the previously alluded to high school course about English literature and loved the story. I loved the personal analysis. I loved getting to know and understand the motives of Frankenstein himself and how his motives affected how his motives affected the monster. And a part of that one particular part of Frankenstein has always stuck with me, that the monster tells the master that you are my creator, you are my God, but you have failed me because you've never given me any direction. Whereas your God gave you the Bible, so I am coming to you for a Bible, a direction, well, in essence, he was after a wife, which Frankenstein then, if you're familiar with the book, Frankenstein originally agreed to do and then refused to create after agreeing to create it. And anyway, that story, I love that story. The next one would be Les Miserables from Victor Hugo. And I was first introduced to the story of Les Mis from the Broadway production, and then the Liam Neeson and Claire Danes film that they did, and then have been a huge fan ever since. I, quite a few years ago, went through and read the unabridged translation, and I don't remember which translation I read, but the translator was phenomenal, and I loved every word. Even, I'm one of the rare folk that even really enjoyed the descriptive details of the Paris sewers and the city of Paris and the cultural background, and how Napoleon's faction and the return of a monarchy influenced everything that was going on, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And have just loved the story. In fact, two of the In fact, two of the characters of Les Mis have been favorite characters of mine, but we'll get to that a little bit later. And then a third on my list is Stephen King's The Stand, and I absolutely loved The Stand, start to finish. Thought it was phenomenal. Thought it was fantastic. It was my first introduction to Stephen King's writing as a science fiction author. First one of his science fictions that I'd read. It wasn't his first fantasy. I think the first fantasy of his that I read was Eye of the Dragon, and I enjoyed that. But then I read The Stand, and I'm like, man, this guy is the best author that ever lived. This is the best author of our time. This is phenomenal. This is incredible. I loved The Stand. Absolutely loved it. And then I guess six, because I can't say favorite books without talking about Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings a great deal. Think it's fantastic. I know not everybody shares my opinion of the awesomeness of the story and how passive a lot of the storytelling is, but I thought it was incredible, and it was really impactful to me, and it dramatically influenced my learning how to write a fantasy novel. And then my next is sorry, that just ignore my son. He's walking around being obnoxious, so just ignore that. Sorry about that. Anyway, the next book on my list of favorites, the fifth book on my list of favorites, probably my second favorite book, is A Bleak House from Charles Dickens, and his ability to go from first person to third person in the narration, depending on the character's point of view, is just masterful. I've never seen anyone else be able to pull it off as well as he did. Honestly, when I first finished reading The Bleak House, I was like, how come no one else has ever told me about this before? This is the second best work I've ever read from Dickens. This is incredible, and I thought it was fantastic, and greatly loved the story from start to finish. And then, of course, all of my followers that have been following, all of you who've been following me for a while, know that my absolute favorite book is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It was really the book that got me to read in the first place. Shut the door. Anyway, sorry about that. I have children who are trying to break into my office for various reasons. Now, so the next thing on my list is who are my favorite literary characters, and I've selected to talk about three. My third and most recent addition to the list is Renee from the Sovereign of the Sea series by K.R. Martin. And I don't know. I finished reading. As soon as I finished reading Pirate Princess, I had a new literary crush in Renee, and have been a huge fan of hers ever since. I think she's incredible. I think she's a wonderful character. I love how strong that she is. I love how the men in her life allow her to do what needs to be done without trying to step in and step on her toes, but trust her and then go do other important tasks, and just trust her to get things done. And I love that she shows the same respect to them and trusts them to do whatever their tasks are. And just think that Renee is just a phenomenal character, and my hat's off to K.R. Martin for creating such a dynamic individual for her series. For those of you who are not familiar with the Sovereign of the Seas, book one is the Pirate Princess, which, as the title implies, it's about a princess who turns to piracy in order to save her kingdom from a foe who would have otherwise killed her. So not afraid to turn pirate, and then does what she can as a pirate to save her kingdom. And anyway, fantastic book, fantastic series. Highly recommend it. I highly recommend the series to anyone who enjoys fantasy, romantic fantasy, and historical fantasy stories. The second the second favorite character of mine that I would like to talk about is the Bishop from Les Miserables. And the Bishop is phenomenal. He, to me, is the example of Christ-like charity, no matter what's going on. And I think he was just a strong inspiration, even now, a strong inspiration for me to be able to think about. And I know some people of Christian faith say, "What would Jesus do?" And some people say, "What would this person, that person?" Well, half the time I find myself thinking about the bishop. When I'm having trouble times, I find myself thinking about the bishop and thinking, I want to be like the bishop. What would the bishop do in this circumstance? How would the bishop show his love to Christ? And it's just been impactful to me. My third and probably my absolute most favorite character in literature is Eponine Thénardier from Les Miserables. And there was just something that resonated with me about Eponine. Beside the fact that my absolute favorite song from the play was On My Own, which is sung by Eponine. But so I've always had a special place in my heart for her. But beyond that, when I go looking into the stories and when I go looking into her story particularly, and the amount of trials that she had and the amount of difficulties that she had going from the daughter of an innkeeper to the daughter of a thief, that she of herself was always a kind person. Her parents kind of, despite the influence of the influence of her parents, and I love Eponine so much that her character and her personality became a strong influence in the creation of Amaranth Hunter. And in fact, when you read the Viscount of Sternborn, the Sternboard, the free book that I give away with my newsletter, you'll see parallels between Amaranth's relationship with Cyrus and Eponine's relationship with Marius. And I just and a lot of Amaranth's character is based on Eponine, and just what I loved about Eponine the most and what I saw about her. Not all of it, of course, because Amaranth is her own character, but the original inspiration was what was Eponine. A couple of side note characters that I won't go into depth on, but are also some favorites of mine, are Neville Longbottom from the Harry Potter series, the little girl from Uncle Tom's Cabin. I can't think of her name, but she absolutely the little girl, the daughter of the slave owner, that was always bright and always perfect, or always Christ-like, despite her many afflictions. She really resonated with me. I just finished Color of Magic, and my favorite character from both the Color of Magic book and then the Color of Magic movie and the Hogwatch movie and the other things from Discworld has been Death. Death from that series is awesome. Other favorite other footnoted favorite characters are Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter, Ginny Weasley from Harry Potter, and John Jarndyce from Bleak House, Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol. I'm thinking that's pretty solid. I mean, the more I read, the more favorite characters I find. But for now, that's that pretty close. So the next question I ask is there anything I want to share with potential readers? I can't really think about that. I don't really know if there's much anything that I want to share with potential readers, other than if you have any questions, you can always reach me on Facebook or on you can reach me on by messaging me on Facebook, or you can reach me via email, jqm.serv@gmail.com. Um, I may want to add the that a lot of my writing, particularly my Realm of the Light series, while not necessarily being Christian based per se, is a lot about dualism and good versus evil, and the light coming to save and help those in darkness. And that I wrote those stories not just to be entertaining, but also to help people the way that I've been helped through reading fantasy and reading fictional overall. And where can we go to learn more about me and my literary works? Well, you have this YouTube channel where this is at. You have my website, jqm.se, jqmserv.wordpress.com. James Quinlan Meservy author on Facebook, and I have a Twitter handle that's floating around somewhere. Best way to find me and my various social media platforms are through my website or my Amazon page. I think I have a handful of them posted there, or just on my Facebook page. So anyway, thank you. I hope you're able to make it through my ramblings, and hope you enjoyed yourself. Well, I hope I wasn't too boring. Anyway, we'll talk to you later, and have a great day.